The first one is the one that I absolutely need to, and I will be mad at myself if I don't, but I will not be mad at myself because I will definitely read this finally. Orientalism by Edward Said. I did it. I read Orientalism by Edward Said. Hi, Jenni here. Let's just get into it. This is my what I read in July 2026 video, and I will go in chronological order. The first book I read was Liisa Suomela Kaikki päättyy kevääseen. This is a local author, and the title translates to Everything Ends in Spring. And in this book, the main character is Tune, who has lost her husband during the war at the front lines. Then her brother was also in the war, and he came back home with severe PTSD. So the book takes place kind of right after the war, Second World War. So she tries to take care of her brother in their home island called Hailuoto, which is an island off of the shore of Oulu, my home city. And there are some new people coming into the island as well. A new priest, Johan, and his wife Siiri. While Johan is excited about this new workplace, Siiri feels incredibly unstable to be taken away from everything she knows from south of Finland. She has a lot of anxiety and a lot of worries about fulfilling the role of being the priest's wife. I think the main theme of this book was mental health. Obviously there are discussions of grief, PTSD, anxiety, stress in all characters. There's also this discussion of women's place in society and what are expected of women. You know, Tune is expected to take care of her brother. Siiri is expected to behave a certain way since she's the priest's wife. Overall, I think this was really lovely, and I always love to read books that are located in my home city or nearby, and I've never read a book that was located in Hailuoto, so that was really special. There were some plot lines that I felt like the book could have done without, but overall a really good reading experience. The next book I read was The Coin by Jasmine Zaher, and I have complex feelings about this book. The main character is a Palestinian woman who lives in New York City and works as a teacher and teaches underserved boys. She teaches English, and she flaunts her wealth a lot, and she also has particularities about cleanliness. That's kind of a vague summary of the plot, because this book was, in my opinion, quite bizarre. The main character has a lot of issues, and it's not, in my opinion, very fascinating, but rather like, oh, you are fucked up. I think those kind of characters can be interesting, but this main character just, with all of the flaunting of her wealth, I just didn't feel the appeal of her. I tried to think that, okay, maybe this book is satire. I don't think it was fully realized in that way either. And then I had some issues with the fact that the main character was an English teacher, and I understand the school curriculum in the US lacks in many ways, but some of her decisions as a teacher I found highly questionable as an English teacher myself. So the book was too weird for me, but I did finish it. Next book is Lea Ypi's Free, Coming of Age at the End of History. Lea Ypi is an academic and a philosopher from Albania, and this book is her perspective as a child going through the collapse of communism in Albania in the 1990s. This is a history that I did not know much about, but I have been interested in learning more about Albania, and this book was a really great way to learn more. I thought Lea would be writing it from the perspective of how she thought and what she found to be real and true as a young child going into teenage years. That was such a good decision from the author, because I feel like other authors would have kind of included their adult musings and views while telling this story that happened here, what happened in Albania. But Lea Ypi doesn't do that. She just focuses on how she felt as a child about, the administration in Albania, the things that were happening around her. And I think it's so incredible and fascinating how she could channel that childhood naivety and innocence regarding her own country. An excellent educational read. I did read this for Dua's Service 95 book club, and after finishing this book I watched Dua's interview with Lea that even expanded my reading experience. An incredible read. Alright, so while I was reading those two, I did read Edward Said, Orientalism. This has been on my shelf for a quite long time, and I've been interested in the topic of the book for a long time, which, discusses how the research from Western countries into Southwest Asia, North Africa, which in this book and oftentimes is referred to as the Middle East or the Arab world, how that research into this region in the West has been veiled with racism and prejudiced attitudes towards the people living in the region. So as I shared in the beginning of the video, this was high on my TBR for this year, and I'm so glad that I read through it. I was very intentional with reading this. I would start a timer on my phone, put my phone far away from me, and then just focus on reading it. I would have like my bookmark and go line by line. I wanted to make sure that I got everything and understood everything. This was released in 1978, and it includes a preface from 2003 and an afterword from 1995. Edward Said, obviously a notable Palestinian and American scholar, intellectual, academic, author, teacher, and I've read his memoir Out of Place before, but this was my first academic read from him. And I think when going into this book you have to remember that although I think everyone should read academic texts, the main audience for this book is the academic crowd. This book was very successful at its release and was sold globally, and it really introduced this topic and this research discipline of Orientalism to people in different parts of the world. I learned a lot from this book because I didn't even know about all of these different Orientalist researchers that Edward Said talked about. I actually have to check. So Edward Lane, Ernest Renan, Gustave Le Bon, I didn't know they even existed. I was quite stunned how they presented all these different findings that they had made within Southwest Asia, North Africa, and kind of how they presented their very clearly to me biased views of people in the region as fact. It shouldn't surprise me, but I was stunned. And the fact that it was shown as legitimate scientific research is so unbelievable to me. Said also talked about how literature and media have portrayed Arab people and how that has impacted actual people living in the region. What I really appreciated was that Edward Said talked about how Arab women specifically have been very overtly sexualized in media and in arts and in literature. I think that's a really important point to bring up. And overall, a really worthy and educational read. And while, of course, it was released in 1978, I think parts of this book still remain very relevant, especially how some media outlets have reported on the Gaza's genocide, always using passive language and things just happening to Palestinian people instead of naming the perpetrator. I feel like this is something that Edward Said already brought up in Orientalism way back then. Great read. Next is This Immortal Heart by Jenni. This is her most recent release, and I've read all of her books so far. They are retellings of Greek mythological stories, and this is Jenni first release under a new book deal. It tells the love story of Aphrodite and Ares. Aphrodite, the goddess of love, and Ares, the god of war. And it gives a very romantic and modern twist to these characters and their love story. The main character is Aphrodite, and the story and the narration unfolds through her character. And I really love this modern perspective to Aphrodite's character. I feel like in history Aphrodite has been portrayed in a kind of biased way, and I feel like this adaptation showed a more caring understanding of Aphrodite because she's goddess of love, come on. And it also had really fascinating, important commentary on our today's society regarding feminism and how women are currently treated. And I absolutely love this one. This is one of my favorite Jennifer Saint releases. Ariadne is my favorite, and then I think second favorite is either Hera or this one. Really loved it. Then I read What You Need from the Night by Laurent Petit-Mangin. This is a very short, quick narrative of a single father who is trying to raise two sons after their mother and his wife passed away. He is active within leftist socialist circles in his hometown, which is in a forgotten part of France, at least according to the back cover, and there aren't as many possibilities and options for his young boys in the town. So his sons have very different journeys. After the passing of their mother, Fous, the older one, falls in with the local far-right group, and the younger one, Gilou, sets off and goes to study in university in Paris. And this book is about the dad, who is the narrator of the book, kind of trying to live with the fact that his son has fallen with this fascist ideology and supports it and just wonders what went wrong. And then kind of how he is vehemently opposing to his son's right-wing views. People around him are like, well, you know, Fous, he would never do X, Y, and Z. But then there's a violent event that happens which changes their lives completely. I really like this book. I thought this was incredibly timely with how far-right and fascist movements have gained popularity in Europe but also all over the world. And I think this was a very humane look into how a family member, a father, would react to this kind of development within his own son. This was really fascinating, and it was written in a very simplistic manner, which I think was very supportive of the narrative. I liked it. Next up is a little bit different Stanley Tucci taste. My Life Through Food. I love watching Stanley Tucci's food series documentaries where he goes into Italy and kind of shows and promotes parts of Italian cuisine that you might not expect in the mainstream. I also really like him as an actor. Actually, he was my top actor on Letterboxd last year because I rewatched all of the Hunger Games and I watched Conclave. So I always loved how he talked about food and how much he wanted to learn more about food and how much he loved it. So when I saw his memoir about food, I was definitely interested right away. And this book is narratively quite similar to his TV shows where he explores Italian cuisine. I learned a lot more about Stanley Tucci. I didn't know much about him. I really appreciated the behind the scenes look into how actors and staff on movie productions eat during the shoots. It also features some recipes. Some of them I'm interested in, some not. I like this. I thought this was a very light read. And the last book is Patchwork, a graphic biography of Jane Austen by Kate Evans. I saw this displayed at the local library and I just had to pick it up as someone who really loves Jane Austen. And it was Jane Austen July, so it was the perfect way to end the month. So, as the title suggests, goes through Jane Austen's life story through illustrations. And there were things that I learned about Jane Austen that I hadn't known before because I've always focused on her work as an author rather than her personal life. And it also featured illustrations for Jane Austen's books. And it has an extensive source list or bibliography. What I really appreciated in this was that, you know, textile work was a really important part of the common women's lives during that era that Jane Austen lived, and that includes Jane Austen. So where did all of those textiles come from? So there is this kind of passage or like an interlude of showing where, for example, linen comes from Ireland that was occupied by Britain. Cotton comes from the United States from slave work. And then some muslin cloths would come from India, you know, which was taken over by Britain as well. So kind of shows just how deep colonialism and imperialism were just part of common people's life during that era, including Jane Austen. I like this. I do think the drawing style was not exactly for me. I understand that people looked different back then, but I don't think it was necessary to make Jane Austen look much older, in my opinion, than she was, considering that she was only 35 when her first book was released. In the book, if I can find an example, here I just think she looks much older. Yeah, the drawing style wasn't exactly for me, but still I liked going through this. I think July was a great reading month. I fit in a lot of different types of literature. I read non-fiction, I read mystical, fantastical fiction, I read social realism, I read biographies. I felt like I had a very balanced, lovely time reading this past July. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this video. See you in the next one. Bye!